so hard.
No. Would you give me 1 minute?
The courtroom falls silent. Every eye fixed on a grieving father ready to explode. Deputies rush in, but it's too late. The pain, the rage, the years of bottled-up grief, it all erupts right there in front of the judge. And this wasn't an isolated moment. Across the country, families of victims have lost control in courtrooms, confronting the people who destroyed their lives. But what really pushes someone past the breaking point? Is it justice? Or something far more human?
What they took from me. They took away my only child. It's been so hard.
Her husband, Willie Clay Fields, was consoling, but suddenly he couldn't bear the pain anymore.
It's been so hard.
Sir, back off, back off, sir, back off, back off, back off, sir, back off.
The officers eventually managed to separate him from Lindy. Eventually, Lindy was sentenced to 35 years in prison, and his brother, Jalen, received a 6-year sentence in juvenile prison. But this wasn't the only time families snapped in court. Like in the case of Diamond Alvarez. Diamond's mother was in court for the trial of 19-year-old Frank Deleon Jr., who fatally shot their 16-year-old daughter 22 times. On January 11th, 2023, Diamond was walking her dog when Frank fatally shot her. Police investigations revealed that the two had been in a relationship and were on the verge of a breakup.
It
Frank
was one of those
promptly
moments
arrested.
that reminded
If you thought
everyone,
Frank would show
in
remorse
court,
for his crimes,
justice
be
might be
prepared for
served,
his
but
jaw-dropping
peace
conduct
rarely
during the
follows.
proceedings.
Just
In court,
months later,
Diamond's mother
another
tells the man who
courtroom
had
turned
wickedly
into
ended her
complete
daughter's life how
chaos.
she felt.
In
As she was
Houston,
giving her
Texas,
statement,
the
Frank
family of
smirked at her.
16-year-old
Enraged,
Diamond
Diamond's
Alvarez
mother went
gathered
to
to
confront
face
him.
Frank Deleon Jr., the 19-year-old who had shot Diamond 22
But before she
times
could
while
make
she
it
was
to the
walking her
smirking
dog.
murderer, the situation escalated.
The two had been
Diamond's
in a
uncle
relationship,
jumped in from the
one
gallery
that
and
ended
attacked
in
Frank.
heartbreak, jealousy, and ultimately murder.
Frank's mother rushed to
During
his
the
defense
trial,
by
Diamond's
attacking
mother stood
Diamond's
before
mother,
Frank,
prompting
her
Diamond's
voice
aunt to
shaking
go
with
after
pain
her.
as she told him what he'd taken from her. But instead of remorse, Frank smirked. That single expression, that cruel smirk, was all it took. Before anyone could react, Diamond's uncle jumped from his seat and charged
Eventually, the
at
police
Frank.
were able to separate
The
the two
courtroom
families.
erupted.
Following the brawl,
Frank's
Diamond's
mother
told
lunged
the
in
media.
to defend her son.
wrong of
Diamond's
me.
aunt
That
leapt
was
to protect
wrong
her
of us
sister.
because we're not
Within
one.
seconds, the entire room was chaos.
But it's so much
Deputies wrestled family
because I
members
want my
apart,
daughter.
restraining them as tears
he
and
did,
shouts filled the air.
It was horrible seeing my daughter there and looking at him that he did that and he's laughing in my face. It was very wrong and I'm so sorry for that.
In the end, Frank accepted a plea deal and was sentenced to 45 years in prison. Fortunately, deputies were ready and stepped in before utter chaos ensued. But the same can't be said for the Utah.
Later,
On
Diamond's
August
mother
23rd,
apologized
2009,
publicly.
Tristan
Through
shot his
tears,
wife,
she said,
19-year-old
"What he did
Misty
was
Lamoreaux,
horrible.
in their house.
We're not
Tristan
monsters.
was eventually
We
arrested.
just want our
now
daughter
in court,
back."
Misty's brother, Jason
In
Wilson,
the end, Frank
walks up to
accepted
the
a plea
podium
deal
to deliver
and
a
was
victim
sentenced
impact
to
statement,
45 years
but
in
not
prison.
before giving Tristan the death
But what
stare.
happened in
While
that
the magnitude of
courtroom
Tristan's
wasn't about
crimes is
punishment.
daunting, his
It was
courtroom
about
behavior
pain,
will leave you in
breaking
disbelief.
through
While
silence.
Jason tells the court how the murder has affected
When a mother
him,
sees the
Tristan
man
appears
who ended her
unconcerned,
child's life
rocking back and
smirking
forth
back
in his
at her.
chair. After
There's
a few
no
minutes of
script
addressing
for
the
what
judge,
comes next.
Jason turns
Not
his
every
focus to his
courtroom
sister's killer.
outburst
But
comes
Tristan's
from
lack
rage.
of remorse
Sometimes
infuriated
it's
him,
silence
and he
that
wanted to let
sets
him know
people
how
off.
he felt.
In Utah, 25-year-old Tristan Lamoreaux sat before the judge, accused of murdering his 19-year-old wife, Misty Lamoreaux, inside
However,
their home.
the deputies were at hand to counter
The
any real
details were
damage.
hard enough to
Following
hear.
the chaos,
But
the
what
officers
happened in
restored everything
court
to
made
order.
it worse.
Eventually, Tristan was
Mr.
sentenced
brother,
to 15 years
Jason
to
Wilson,
life in prison.
stood to give his
However,
victim
Jason
impact
Wilson wasn't
statement.
alone in their courtroom
He spoke
actions.
about the sister
like in the
he
case
lost,
of Michael Madison,
the hole
a
left in
serial
their
killer who was
family,
facing multiple
the
charges,
endless
including
questions
3
that
counts
never
of
get
murder in
answers.
Ohio. Between 2012
And through
and
it all,
2013, Michael killed
Tristan
3 women
just
before he was eventually
rocked
arrested.
back and forth
Before
in
his
his
preliminary
chair.
hearing, Michael
No
learns the
emotion,
magnitude of his crime.
no regret.
Mr.
Just
Madison,
a
I'm
blank
going to
stare
read
that
to you the
almost
nature of
looked
the
bored.
charges against you and
The more
summarize
Jason
each one
spoke,
for you, as well
the
as giving
harder
you
it
the
was to
potential
stay
penalties.
calm.
I know you've had a chance to speak
He
with counsel,
finally
is that correct,
turned
sir?
toward Tristan, his voice
In the first
breaking,
charge, you're
his
charged with
anger
aggravated
spilling
murder
over,
in violation of Ohio
ready to make
Revised
him
Code
feel at least a
2903.01.
fraction of the pain he
It
caused.
states that on or about the 22nd day of July, you did purposely cause the death of an unidentified female while committing another felony. The offense was committed 1 week to 9 months prior to the finding of the body. That is a Jane Doe murder. The second murder is the same date, on or about the 22nd day of July. Michael Madison did purposely cause the death of an Angela Deskins while committing another felony. The offense was committed 3 weeks or a few weeks prior to the finding of the body. And then there's a third murder charge. On or about the 22nd day of July, Michael Madison did purposely cause the death of an unidentified female while committing another felony. The offense was committed 1 week to 1 month prior to the finding of the body. All of those are felonies of the first degree because they are aggravated murder. They are punishable by a possible death or life in prison and a $100,000 fine. You understand that?
Now in court, Van Terry, the father of one of the victims, addresses the judge.
How you doing, Your Honor? My name is Van Terry. Right now, I guess we're supposed to, in our hearts, forgive this clown.
Van Terry now turns to speak directly to Michael.
Taking my child.
However, the real shocker came when Michael unleashed his madness in the courtroom by smirking at Van Terry, unleashing chaos. Eventually, the police were able to restore order and the proceeding continued. Now, it's time for the jury to give their decision.
We therefore unanimously find that the sentence of death should be imposed upon the defendant, Michael Madison.
Following the jury's recommendation, Judge Nancy McDonnell reads her sentence.
I am struck by the sheer inhumanity of what one human being can do to not one, but 3 human beings. It is incomprehensible. You cajoled, lured, and deceived Shatisha Shealy, Angela Deskins, and Sherelda Terry to your apartment for your depraved purposes. You went on to abuse the corpses of these 3 victims. You stripped them from the waist down. You folded them in half, binding them so that their feet were up by their ears. You wrapped them in multiple layers of trash bags, and you discarded them. Upon consideration of the relevant evidence, the testimony exhibits admitted in mitigation, it is a judgment of this court that the aggravated circumstances of course of conduct, felony murder, kidnapping, felony murder, of which the defendant was convicted, outweigh the mitigating factors by proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Accordingly, the sentence of death is imposed upon the defendant, Michael Madison, on counts 1, 4, and 7.
Following the sentence, the victims' families expressed how they felt. Michael Madison is still awaiting his death in prison. But this wasn't the only time parents snapped because of how the killer was acting in court, like during the sentencing of 18-year-old Payton Gendron, who's facing multiple charges for murder.
Oh my God, he shot so many.
Deputies stepped in immediately, holding Jason back before the moment could explode into violence. When it was over, the courtroom fell silent again. Tristan showed no reaction as the judge sentenced him to 15 years to life in prison. But for Jason, that sentence meant nothing. He'd looked into the eyes of his sister's killer and saw absolutely nothing looking back.
Thinking about what a beautiful person you took.
My daughter, Robbie Drury, was a young woman. She was not married. She had no children. She never will. Robbie was our youngest daughter. When people ask, how many children do you have? I don't know what to say.
In Ohio, one courtroom became the stage for something far more disturbing. Michael Madison, a convicted serial killer, sat motionless as the judge read out his charges. 3 counts of aggravated murder, each one describing the horrific details of how he lured and killed his victims. Among the families listening was Van Terry, the father of one of the young women Madison murdered. When it was his turn to speak, Van stepped up to the podium, clutching a picture of his daughter. His voice was steady at first. "I guess we're supposed to forgive this clown," he said. Then, as he turned toward Madison, something snapped. Madison smirked. That smirk, cold, careless, was the final straw. Van lunged at him in front of everyone, shouting in rage as deputies tried to hold him back. The courtroom erupted. Moments later, after officers restored order, the judge continued with what was already a grim proceeding. When the jury returned with their decision, the room fell silent again.
You got my family crying. I miss my sister every day. You don't like black people. Man, you don't know a damn thing about black people. We're human. We like our kids to go to good schools. We love our kids.
However, while she was speaking, a supposed family member wanted to let Payton know how he felt.
We never go in those neighborhoods and take people out. Don't do it.
We, the jury, find that the sentence of death should be imposed upon the defendant, Michael Madison. The judge paused before speaking directly to him. "I am struck by the sheer inhumanity of what one human being can do to another. You folded your victims in half, wrapped them in trash bags, and threw them away like garbage." Madison didn't flinch. As the judge pronounced the death sentence, Van Terry sat quietly this time. Drained but resolute. Justice, in a legal sense, had been served. But that smirk. It's what everyone remembered. One small expression that revealed just how far from human Michael Madison truly was. On May 14th, 2022, a quiet afternoon in Buffalo, New York, turned into one of the darkest days in recent memory. Payton Gendron, an 18-year-old white supremacist, opened fire inside a grocery store in a predominantly black neighborhood. 10 people lost their lives. 3 others were injured. All of them were targeted because of the color of their skin. When Payton finally faced the victims' families in court, the air felt heavy, the kind of silence that comes from grief too deep to measure. One by one, loved ones stood up to speak. "You destroyed our lives forever," said one mother. "There's not a day that goes by that I don't think, what if I was 2 minutes sooner? Could I have saved her?" Another family member, Barbara Massey, spoke through tears and fury. "You killed my sister. You don't even know us. You drove hundreds of miles to murder strangers. I want to choke you and leave my fingerprints on your neck." Her voice cracked, her pain raw, until a relative behind her suddenly shouted, ready to rush at Payton before deputies intervened. The courtroom broke into chaos for just a moment, the sound of grief echoing louder than any gavel could silence. When order returned, Payton stood to speak. His voice was quiet. "I'm very sorry for the pain I caused. I can't believe I actually did it. I believed what I read online and acted out of hate." But for the families sitting there, his apology meant nothing. The damage was already done. The judge's final words were cold and absolute. "You will never see the light of day as a free man again." Payton Gendron was sentenced to life in prison without parole, a punishment that couldn't undo what hate had already taken.
One after the other.
I am Jessica Tomashow, also known as Victim A. I was sexually assaulted by Larry Nassar when I was 9 and 12 years old. You broke and shattered a lot of girls. You manipulated us to trust you because you're a doctor, and doctors do no wrong, only heal. You are not a healer.
Now it's time for the parents to address Larry.
I don't know who you are now. Maybe I never knew. Maybe none of us did. But Larry...
Some monsters don't hide in the shadows. They hide behind titles, trust, and authority. For years, Larry Nassar was seen as a respected doctor, a man who helped shape the careers of Olympic gymnasts and young athletes. But behind the medical gloves and polite smile, he was committing unthinkable acts. Hundreds of women and girls later came forward, revealing how he used his position to sexually abuse them under the guise of treatment. When the truth finally caught up with him, Nassar sat in court, surrounded by his victims, and by parents who would never forgive him. One father, Randall Margraves, listened as his daughters described in detail what Nassar had done. Then he turned to the judge and said, "Would you give me 1 minute with this man?" The judge refused. Randall's voice broke. "Would you give me 1 minute? That's not how this works? Then I'm going to have to get one anyway."
Because she couldn't deal with the pain anymore. It'll be 10 years in March.
For this particular parent, Larry's tears hold no value.
And before anyone could move, he lunged at Nassar. Officers tackled him to the ground, the courtroom erupting in gasps and shouts. Moments later, as deputies restrained him, the father apologised. But his pain said everything words couldn't. Later, Nassar stood to deliver his so-called apology, claiming he was sorry for the pain he'd caused. But even the judge saw through him. "I just signed your death warrant," she said. "You remain a danger to society. Your actions were calculated, devious, despicable." Nassar was sentenced to 175 years in prison. A lifetime of silence for a man who once thrived on power. And while his victims will spend years rebuilding their lives, that one father's cry, "Give me 1 minute," will forever echo as the sound of justice that came too late. For some families, the pain doesn't build slowly. It explodes in an instant. In one courtroom, Kwin Boes had just been sentenced to 25 years for killing his 11-month-old son. As officers led him away, the baby's uncle, Jeremiah Lay, suddenly launched forward and punched him square in the face before being tackled to the floor. Jeremiah served nearly 6 months in jail for the outburst, but said he'd do it again if it meant defending his nephew's memory. In another case, Vashon Flowers was sentenced for fatally shooting his wife after an argument over cigarettes. When the judge began reading the sentence, the victim's teenage son, London Thomas, broke down in tears, shouting and trying to charge toward Flowers before deputies restrained him. The sound of that cry filled the entire courtroom.
Your survivors have said all of that. I don't want to repeat it. Sir, I'm giving you 175 years, which is 2,100 months. I just signed your death warrant. I need everyone to be quiet.
Then, there was Kevin Hall, whose brother had been killed by a 15-year-old boy in Texas. When the jury found the teen guilty of negligent homicide instead of murder, Kevin stood up, shouting in disbelief. And before anyone could stop him, he attacked the boy right there in front of the judge. 5 days in jail was the price of his anger, but no punishment could match his loss. And finally, Dwayne Smith, the father of a 3-year-old girl beaten to death by her mother and boyfriend. During sentencing, Dwayne approached the stand to give a victim impact statement, but instead he swung his fists. The courtroom erupted as deputies wrestled him down, the room filled with the sound of sobbing and chaos. Each of these moments lasted only seconds, but they revealed something we rarely see. When grief collides with injustice, logic disappears. These weren't criminals acting out. They were broken hearts, desperate for a sense of control in a place built for order. In 2017, a small Ohio courtroom braced for one of the most volatile hearings it had ever seen. Dale Williams was facing charges for the murder of his ex-girlfriend, Elizabeth Pledger Stewart, a woman he had once promised to love. Instead, he ran her car off the road and shot her multiple times as witnesses watched in horror. Now, in court, Elizabeth's family filled the benches, clutching tissues and photos, waiting for their chance to speak. The victim's daughter stepped forward, her voice trembling as she began her statement. But before she could finish, 2 of Elizabeth's sons snapped. They leapt from their seats, shouting and charging toward Williams. The courtroom erupted instantly. Officers tackled them mid-sprint, tasers drawn, as family members screamed for calm. The chaos was raw, the kind that makes even the judge freeze for a moment. The hearing had to be stopped and rescheduled. When court resumed days later, Elizabeth's aunt finally stood to speak. Through tears, she said, "We saw his face that day. The same face that killed my niece. We can't unsee it." Williams showed no emotion, as he was sentenced to 15 years to life in prison. But the pain left behind in that courtroom would last far longer. In the end, the 2 brothers who attacked him were also sentenced. Proof that in moments of unbearable grief, no one leaves the courtroom untouched. It was one final eruption, a haunting reminder that even when justice is served, peace rarely follows. In courtrooms, justice is supposed to bring closure. But for the families left behind, it often opens wounds that never truly heal. Every outburst, every tear, every scream in those rooms isn't about revenge. It's about love colliding with loss. Some call it chaos, others call it weakness, but maybe it's the most human response of all. Because when justice moves too slowly, emotion takes over. And as long as pain exists inside those walls, there will always be another breaking point. Another moment when grief overpowers order. These are the stories that remind us. In court, the verdict ends the case, but it never ends the pain. If you found this story powerful, don't miss what happens in the next courtroom, where a single sentence pushed a grieving mother beyond the edge.
The police had to use their tasers to bring order to the court. The session was rescheduled. This time, the victim's aunt was able to say her mind.
When we saw his face, we felt it was so much due to a flashback of how he just killed
Eventually, Dale was sentenced to 15 years to life in prison. But that wasn't all. The two brothers appeared in court. Dale continues to serve his sentence in prison.